Anima is an anime-focused image generation model by Circlestone Labs. Its initial preview came out in late January 2026, and its full 1.0 version came out about a week and a half ago as of time of recording. What's interesting about this model is that it's designed to be a lightweight anime model from the get-go. You might be familiar with other models like Stable Diffusion Illustrious and Neta Yume Lumina, but those models are anime fine-tunes of realistic base models, whereas Anima, based on the NVIDIA Cosmos architecture, was trained from the ground up on anime and Western cartoon-style datasets. The model size is a mere 2 billion parameters, making it orders of magnitude smaller than other new models like Flux, Stable Diffusion 3, and QuinImage, with QuinImage being one of the largest at 20 billion parameters. For anime models, since there hasn't been a clear successor to Stable Diffusion XL, and with Anima being a collaborative effort with the Comfy UI developers, the full release of this model has been anticipated all year. And after a week and a half of basically generating images non-stop, I'm finally ready to show you my analysis. And I do mean analysis. I'm not going to just show you a bunch of random images. I have a methodology, and I hope you like benchmarks, because we're going to take a look at the raw performance first and see how it stacks up against other models. Now, since everybody's machine is different, it's hard to say how fast this is going to be for you. But I figured that if I compare this with other well-known models that you may have used, you'll get a better sense of how this model performs. Here I've benchmarked Stable Diffusion XL. I feel like if you're interested in Anima, you're coming from an SDXL background probably. Neta Yume Lumina, which I feel to be the closest thing to a direct competitor to Anima, and Flux 2 Klein, in addition to Anima itself, of course. To make this an apples-to-apples comparison, this is 30 steps at the same resolution once the model has already been warmed up and loaded into VRAM. This does include the VAE decode step, so it's not an isolated iterations per second measurement. Now, the first thing to note is that Stable Diffusion XL is, of course, faster. It's a 4-year-old model. I don't think you're going to find a model in 2026 that runs as fast as XL. Now, interestingly enough, the raw size of Anima is smaller than SDXL. SDXL is 2.6 billion parameters and Anima is only 2. And curiously, Neta Yume Lumina, which is based on Lumina 2.0, is a 2.6 billion parameter model as well. So really, these are fair comparisons on models that are about the same size. And as you can see, size is not everything when it comes to inference time. While you might be disappointed with Anima's relative performance here, when stacked up against larger models like Flux 2 Klein, 9 billion parameters, it's definitely more reasonable. One thing to note about all image models is that inference time scales exponentially with resolution. You might not notice that with Stable Diffusion XL because it's so fast, but when the image generation time increases from about 1 minute to 5 minutes, it really does start to hurt. To better illustrate this exponential curve, let me take this same data and divide it by the number of steps and the number of pixels. Now, this kind of flips what you're looking at because this is iterations per second, so higher is faster. But this lets you better visualize that exponential curve where performance drops off dramatically fast. Now, this is a real bummer because while SDXL was never really designed to do anything bigger than 1 megapixel, Anima is. It's trained on images that are about 1.5 megapixels, and it can actually generate images that look pretty good at 2 megapixels. But it becomes impractically slow at these resolutions, so what can we do about it? Well, basically the same thing we've done with all previous models, which is generate at a lower resolution and then upscale. But the motivation in this case is different. While generating 2 megapixel images on SDXL is basically a non-starter, the composition comes out all weird, you can do it on Anima, it's just slow. So our motivation here is to save time while not sacrificing too much of that compositional quality. And I think I've come up with a workflow that does exactly that. There are 2 sources of speed increase going on here. First is a simply faster turnaround time. Since about a third of the total time is spent generating the base resolution image, You can get a preview of it relatively fast, and you can stop it if you don't like what's going on. This is ideal for refining the prompt. You don't want to wait around for 5 minutes and discover that you had to make a slight adjustment. And in addition to that, the total generation time is reduced by 25%. That might not sound like a lot, but consider that in a batch process, that increases the amount you can do from 16 to 20 in the same amount of time. But of course, now the question becomes, what is the qualitative difference between generating at the high resolution to begin with and upscaling? Well, based on my tests, I believe both of these processes to be roughly the same. I've seen some instances where things come out a little bit more crisp when doing the upscaling, but then again, I've seen instances in the high resolution workflow too, where things come out more detailed. And I think this just boils down to situational differences and the prompt itself. So when you're evaluating this for yourself, just be careful about coming to a conclusion based off of a handful of samples. And just be aware that we're all subject to confirmation bias and placebo effect. Moving on from raw generation time, let's talk about VRAM usage, because that's a deciding factor in whether or not this is practical for you to run on your machine. Determining the VRAM usage has turned out to be a little bit more difficult than I anticipated. You would think it's a pretty straightforward answer, but take a look at these plots and let me show you what I mean. To begin with, I generated on my AI Max 395 Plus. It's got 128 gigabytes of shared memory. 112 of that is accessible as VRAM. And while the GPU is not the fastest thing in the world, the effectively unlimited amount of VRAM is very useful for determining when you're coming across a VRAM bottleneck on other systems. And I profiled this on an AMD 6800 XT with 16 gigabytes and an AMD 6750 XT with 12 gigabytes. And after trying a range of resolutions, I found something funny. At lower resolutions, my inference time matched the AI Max, but as resolution went up, I seemed to encounter what looks like a VRAM bottleneck, a sudden and dramatic increase in inference time, and we can see that this perfectly follows with the 12 gigabyte card first and then the 16 gigabyte card. But what bothers me about this is that I was monitoring the VRAM usage the whole time, and it never really got above about 10 gigabytes. And really, more often than not, it was much smaller than that. Now, what might be happening here is that ComfyUI's automatic memory offloading is kicking in perhaps a little bit too aggressively. And to test this theory, I tried out different quantizations on my 12 gigabyte card. Because, in theory, if I switch from the full-size model to an FP8 quantization, I should be able to save enough VRAM to avoid the bottleneck. And while I did see a reduction in VRAM usage, I did not see a reduction in time. All four models took roughly the same amount of time to run, which is very surprising to me. And I can give you the memory numbers from my AI Max, but its shared memory architecture makes it more difficult to separate out just the VRAM usage from total memory usage, including RAM. So yeah, all that to say, I don't exactly know how to answer this question. I feel like you'll be okay with a 16 gigabyte card as long as you pay close attention to the resolution. But if anybody has better insight as to what's going on here, let me know because I'm curious. Next, let's take a look at the text encoder, which is responsible for transforming your prompt into something that the model can understand. And in this case, it's a small version of Qwen 3, the 0.6b version. It's a pretty sophisticated family of language models, although, of course, the smallest version does have its limitations. So how are we going to test it? Well, basically, the text encoder is in charge of the general composition. So we're going to throw together a lot of specific details and see if it ever gets mixed up. If the text encoder is good, we should be able to specify more complex compositions. For instance, in this image, I've specified pretty much exactly what you see here. The character on the left is eating a cheeseburger and the character on the right is eating a hot dog. In addition, all of the clothing is exactly correct. The color of the seats is correct. The background is correct. The setting is correct. But I did a batch to see how often it was correct and how often it made mistakes. And in this case, I give it really high marks. Every once in a while, I would see a milkshake that I never specified, or the hot dog started looking like a hamburger, but in this case, I don't know whether to blame the text encoder or the model itself, because the model might have a pretty weak idea of what a hot dog is in the first place, and so it might just accidentally take on a lot of hamburger-like qualities. But aside from those kind of minor mistakes, this is generally very good. I found 0 instances of character concept bleed, which is mixing different character attributes together into one character. None of that here, which is very impressive. But expanding this idea out to 3 characters, we can start to see cracks in the seams. This is a lot more tokens, these are a lot more details to keep track of. And while it's still good for the most part, it's not accurate 100% of the time like it was with 2 characters. So for instance, the middle character is supposed to be holding a stuffed animal. Oftentimes that appears somewhere else in the scene or disappears altogether. And the character on the right is supposed to have purple hair, but she often has character bleed from the other 2. Now, I guess you could argue that failures like this could be more of a function of the model rather than the text encoder, but at any rate, this combination of model and encoder have trouble keeping things straight when the prompt gets this complicated. And speaking of complicated things, let's talk about text. The author of the model fully admits that it's not good at rendering text, but let's try it anyway. I'd say more often than not the text is wrong, but it does know where to put the text and it does know generally what it's supposed to look like. But yeah, don't count on it being able to do stellar text. I can't dock it too many points though, because even the mighty Quinn image with the text encoder and model both 10 times the size of this, even that messes up text. One last side note before I leave this section, you can actually swap out this text encoder with other fine-tunes of Quinn 3.0.6b. I tried using an obliterated version that I found on Hugging Face and it did work just fine, but I'm not sure that doing this has any real utility. But it's just something I found interesting, and maybe it's worth playing with, I don't know. So let's move on and try to assess the aesthetic quality of the model itself. Of course, this is going to depend on the quality of the prompt. There are a lot of artist tags and quality tags. Certain styles work better than others. But this isn't going to be a prompt foo lesson or anything. It's my belief that a good model should look good without having to wrangle it a lot. So I'm going to show you a few examples, and we're going to zoom in on the fine details. Here's a selection of some of the burger stuff from earlier. I just wanted to show you some of the hits and misses on the hands, as well as the eye quality. I'm a big fan of eye detail. I really like it when a model gets the eyes right, and I am zoomed in on these. These are really good quality eyes. The hands, of course, are a hit and miss. I think over this entire batch, maybe they're 50-50. But holding a burger is one of those more difficult situations for hands, especially that hand in the background behind the burger. Moving on to a prompt that has artist tags in it, I really feel like these two are a good example of the variation you can still get even when you use artists. These are from the same batch, so same prompt, different seed, multiple artists in the prompt, interesting variation, and I just like how both of these have a fairly polished look to them. Next, I just really liked this ghost one, so I figured I'd zoom in on some of the details. I like the hands and the face and the background details and everything. I didn't even use any artists for this one, so this just goes to show you that you can still get started without having a lexicon of artists. But speaking of, I decided to incorporate artist wildcards when generating these large batches overnight. If you're interested in any of my workflows, they're all publicly available. I have a link in the description. But here's an example of the same prompt with different artist tags, just to show you the built-in variation of styles that are possible. I generated a lot more, but I don't really want to spend that much time showing you random prompts. And I want to move on to the next thing, which is inpainting. Now, you can do a lot of things with inpainting, but I have a very specific goal in mind, and that is refining the details. I want to make those eyes pop. I want to put fingernails on the hands. I want all the tiny little details in the clothes, like the buttons and the seams. I want the lines to look crisp, you know what I'm saying? So I worked out an inpainting workflow with SAM3. It allows me to specify anything I want, and it'll automatically make the selection. I've used this workflow before on other models, but let's see how this one stacks up. It took me a few tries to figure out what works best, but I think if you use the entire original prompt and add the specific details that you want to inpaint, that is the best thing to do. Sometimes in Stable Diffusion XL, you can use a very narrow mask and say, this is a hand close-up, and it'll do a pretty good job. But I found it was better in this case to put both hands in one mask and provided the larger context. Now, the way this works is that a selection mask is made and then an image-to-image operation is performed on the entire mask area, and then the mask is applied so that only the desired area changes. So obviously, more context is better, especially when you have the full prompt in there. Anyway, one thing to pay attention to when inpainting is discoloration. Sometimes the colors of the new image don't match the old one, and this can be especially noticeable with solid colors like a blue sky. Fortunately, I didn't notice any egregious color differences. Next, let's take a look at its ability to add detail. The idea here is that you make a selection, you focus its attention on that area, and if you process it at a high enough resolution, it should be able to fill in the details. Now, I will say that the level of detail out of the box is already pretty good, so you usually don't even have to do this. But still, I wanted to push it further and give it that extra oomph, and I think that it did a good enough job. One thing that I like about XL fine-tunes like Illustrious is that you can get it to generate really fine lines, and I didn't notice that as much here. The lines are always a little bit thicker and a little bit less crisp. I wouldn't go so far as to say it's bad, but it could be better. And it's possible that the style and artist tags that I'm using are the limiting factor here. But I'm going to say that inpainting and image-to-image more generally are going to do what you want it to do. I think I've gone on long enough, so let me give you some closing thoughts. If you're coming from a Stable Diffusion XL background, you might be disappointed with how slow this is. Instead of expecting that quick turnaround, you're going to have to get used to trusting the prompt a little bit more. And you might find that your total time investment is about the same because while it's slower, it does have higher accuracy in composition. And of course, if you insist on going faster, there are turbo LoRa's. And the author, Circlestone Labs, is working on a turbo fine-tune, which is not out yet as of time of recording. Just be aware that turbo is a time-quality trade-off. This is especially true for most turbo LoRa's where you sacrifice the ability to do a negative prompt. As for model capability, I give Anima a very high score. I think the prompt adherence is the best out of any anime-style model I've used so far, and it is the easiest model to prompt with that I've ever used. You can use plain English sentences, you can use comma-separated lists of Dambaru and Gelbaru tags, you can use pony-style quality tags, and you can mix really any prompting style that you like. I've used all the major models out there, and all of them kind of have their own quirks with how you prompt. But I feel like this model has maybe the lowest learning curve. So if you're someone who's shied away from using local models in the past because you don't want to learn prompt foo, this is a good one to start with. Of course, you can elevate your generation to the next level by adjusting your quality and artist tags, but it's not required to get started. So give this model a try. Maybe start with the template workflow in Comfy UI. If you're interested in my workflows, they're on GitHub under Comfy Workflows. I have a link in the description. Or if Comfy UI is not your thing, try Forge Neo, or maybe try the Krita AI diffusion extension. But at any rate, even if you decide that Anima is not for you, I hope you found this video informative. Thank you for watching, and have a nice day.